He didn't even let me breathe before hanging up. "Dad, I'm getting married tomorrow. Your car and house are sold. Bye." That one sentence split 40 years down the middle. Love replaced by leverage, a son turning my name into paperwork. By the time the dial tone died, I knew the fire wasn't in my house. It was in my family, and I'd have to fight it with proof, not tears. Before we dive into today's story, let us know where you're watching from. And as you watch, don't just sit back. Be part of the experience. If a moment grabs you, powerful, unexpected, or deeply moving, drop a comment with the timestamp and your thoughts. Your reactions bring the story to life, and we love seeing which moments hit home. If you haven't already, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Now grab a coffee or tea, settle in, and let's begin. Cold, high desert light slid across my porch just after 7, sharpening every nailhead in the boards and turning the San Francisco peaks the color of old steel. I stood there with a black mug that had survived more kitchen drops than I cared to admit, listening to a freight horn take its time along Route 66. The air smelled like sun-warmed sap and last night's frost. When I breathed deep, I tasted pine and a trace of dust, the way Flagstaff always tastes before the day decides if it wants wind. Inside, the house kept its own weather. The percolator ticked like a metronome on the stove. My shoulder, the bad one, hummed the way it does on mornings when a storm is off somewhere beyond the mesas. I clicked on the AM radio, traffic cattle rancher forecasts, a warning about early monsoon cells forming in the south. The voice was steady, courteous, confident that people would act sensibly if given enough facts. I liked that assumption. It reminded me of the job. The garage took the light and scattered it. Pine dust hung in a neat golden cloud over the bench. I ran a fingertip along the fresh edge of a table apron I'd planed last night and felt the heat still trapped in the wood. Clamps bit a farmhouse tabletop I was gluing up for the gallery. My chisels sat in a shadowed rack, oiled and pointed toward the work, like dogs at heel, waiting for the leash to come off. Against the far wall, the truck, my 1998 F-150, caught a stripe of sun that made the cherry paint look like something you could eat with a spoon. I had rebuilt that engine one gasket at a time. The title and maintenance log sat in a binder labeled by year. The key ring hung on a nail by the door right where Nora used to say it should live so I could find it in the dark. I made a list at the workbench: roof inspection before the monsoons, windshield gasket on the truck, drop a check at the Veterans Hall for the ramp they're building, deliver a chair to the gallery by 4, call Mason about Sunday. I wrote the last item slower than the rest. A man can tear through a burning attic and still hesitate over a phone call if it leads toward a room he doesn't know how to enter anymore. The mantel in the front room wore the history we hadn't let the years take. Nora's photo in a simple oak frame, smiled just to one side, as if the photographer had said something sly a second earlier. My old brass badge leaned against the glass. When the city retired me, they let me keep that little son. She used to tap it when my breathing went quick, the way breath gets when the room starts to crowd. Breathe, Walt. Slow down. See the whole room. That was her prescription for every kind of heat. The hallway held the other relic I visit when the quiet gets loud. Mason at 10 years old on a red bicycle, socks dirty to the ankle, both knees scuffed. One front tooth missing and the grin even bigger because of it. Below the photo, tucked into the frame, the note he wrote in block letters and lined up like a promise: "I will protect you, Dad." People laugh when I tell them I kept it. I don't mind. I kept worse. I kept the smell of wet ash in a closet over decades. I kept the sound a roof makes the second before it gives up. It's natural to store what reminds you who you've been. Out on the side fence, Hector Alvarez lifted 2 fingers without looking up from the feed he was scattering for the scrub jays. He's retired highway patrol and started his mornings the way I like men to start theirs. Early, with gravity. We don't talk much across the fence. We have an agreement with the sun and the birds that the hour belongs to them. When it's fully their turn, we speak. "Morning, Walt," he called, not loud. "Morning, Hector," I said, and that passed for fellowship. The safe sits where a thief won't think to crouch. I pulled the panel and checked the contents like I was counting pulse. Deed to the house fully paid, insurance policies, a worn envelope with the estate packet I'd put together the year Nora died, the truck title, a stack of receipts bound by a rubber band. Order on paper is a quiet kind of religion. It limits what chaos can do on a weekday afternoon. I put both hands on the little stack and felt a calm that had nothing to do with belief and everything to do with preparation. When you've seen how fast a good room can burn, you learn to set your exits before you sit down. I sanded the chair for the gallery until the grain answered me with that low purr a hand plane can't give. The radio gave up to static and I shut it off. The house had settled into its familiar, careful pose. Somewhere on the block, a lawnmower started, then stopped. I caught the porch swing with my palm and set it to moving, just enough to keep the chain from squeaking when the wind came. The list on the bench had more lines through it than not. Only the last two remained. Porch bulb, call Mason. I thought about the call as I screwed in the new bulb and the glass globe clicked home. I'd keep it simple. I'd talk chili in a baseball game and tell him there was a chair in the garage that had his name if he wanted to sit in it. I would not circle the long field of things we had not said. I would not treat him like a patient or a suspect or a strange man at my door. I would speak to him as the boy in the photo wished to be spoken to and let the rest be work for another day. By late afternoon, the light turned sleeker, the kind that slides under curtains and makes a room look newly washed. I wiped the bench twice, put the plane in its place, capped the glue, checked the clamps once more. I rinsed my mug, placed it on the drain board where the water could walk itself into the sink. The house was in order. The list was honest. The day had the gentle fatigue of a finished shift. If I'd known what waited on the other side of the ring, I might have stepped outside and let the phone tire itself out. It rang on the kitchen counter. 3 clean notes I'd never bothered to change. I didn't hurry. Years on a siren will unteach a man the habit of sprinting at every sound. I dried my hands on a dish towel and reached for the handset as if it were any other bright, ordinary thing a day might bring. The phone rang while the kitchen still smelled like sawdust and coffee. I reached for it on the second chime, more out of habit than urgency, and touched the green circle. Mason's voice came at me bright and breathless, as if he were running downhill, not thinking about how the road bends. "Dad, listen, I'm getting married tomorrow. Also, your car and the house are sold. Bye." The line snapped shut. 3 electronic beeps floated where his voice had been, the way a smoke alarm keeps chirping after the flame is out. I kept the phone to my ear a second longer than made sense. The glass warmed the inside of my thumb, the refrigerator's compressor kicked on and laid a low hum under the room. The old wall clock ticked in pairs, a tiny heel and toe on the plaster. I set my mug down too hard and watched coffee chase itself in a brown ring across the counter, then climb the lip and shiver back. My shoulders climbed without asking permission. I breathed in against the rise, counted to 4, breathed out to 8. Nora's rule settled like a hand on my chest. Breathe, slow down, see the whole room. I redialed. The call slid into voicemail before the first ring finished. I ended, tried again, then texted twice in clean, short lines. "Call me. Where are you?" Both messages blinked to life with the small confirmation that he'd read them. Nothing came back. A third call met the recorded notice that his mailbox was full. I stared at the screen and felt the silence grow new teeth. When a man wants you to hear him, he leaves a channel open. This was a door shut with care. The house is not a man, but you can ask it a question, and sometimes it answers. I walked to the garage and pulled the chain. Fluorescent light struck the concrete in 2 long bars. The truck sat where I left it, at parade rest, chrome clean as a church spoon. The key ring hung on its nail, cocked slightly as if someone had breathed near it and changed its balance. I took the keys, rolled the metal in my palm, heard the sound it always makes, the small clatter of a life that has kept itself in order. Sold doesn't always mean gone. It can mean transacted on paper and waiting for your signature to wake the transfer. My phone chimed. A new email sat in the inbox with the plain blue logo of Flagstaff title and escrow. Subject line, Quitclaim deed, e-sign pending. The body was professional to the point of absence, a paragraph about convenience, a line about deadlines, a link to a portal that would streamline your experience. My name appeared as signer 1, underlined like a promise I had never made. A second attachment mentioned vehicle transfer assistance and referenced a class code that could have covered a truck older than some of my neighbors. No amounts, no specifics. The flags rose on their own. Outside, my motion light tripped and splashed the side yard. Hector leaned his forearms on the fence and read my face the way his old job taught him to read a roadside shoulder. He used one word that didn't need volume. Fire, I answered with one to match. Paper. He nodded once. Then make it wet and heavy. I didn't need the translation. Records, timestamps, copies, locks. You don't argue with wind, you lay hose. Back in the bedroom, I pulled the panel and spun the dial on the small safe until the click sounded like relief. Deed, title, policies, the estate packet with my notes from the year the world lost a shape it took decades to make. I carried the stack to the kitchen table and squared the edges until the corners looked like thought. My pulse ticked down as the pile grew. Paper may not stop fire, but it slows it long enough to make a plan. When I turned to put the envelope back, a thinner folder skated out of the bottom and laid itself open. Photocopy, not original. Power of attorney across the top in a font that pretends to be serious. My name where it should be. Mason's name where it should not. The signature looked like mine at first glance, but the Q on Quinn rose shallow and short. Not the taller loop my hand learned 40 years ago when a captain told me to start signing like an adult. The notary stamp belonged to a mobile service out of Phoenix. The date suggested last spring, the week Mason drove me to the cardiologist and stacked medical forms on a clipboard like shingles. I remember signing releases for records, an acknowledgement about billing, a consent to treatment. I don't remember granting power over the roof I sleep under or the key that starts my truck. Memory is a pretty liar, so I set it on a chair and worked with what doesn't blink. I opened a fresh page in a spiral notebook and wrote the clinic's name, the date, the hour, the nurse's hair color, the game that had been on the waiting room TV with the sound off. I wrote how Mason had tapped each page with the end of my pen where he wanted initials. I wrote the way my hand had hurried because the tech had said they were behind. I wrote because later I would need bones, not fog. I forwarded the email to 2 addresses that only live on paper and printed the attached PDFs to a machine I had thought of as an afterthought. The printer breathed blue light at the stack the way a small animal breathes at night. I took my phone and walked the house, photographing the deed, the title, the insurance pages, the will summary, then emailing them to a folder that didn't look like a folder. I toggled 2-factor authentication where I hadn't bothered before. I logged out of every session on every device and watched the app throw me to the login screen as if it were a bouncer with a list. The room grew quiet the way hallways do after smoke drifts past. Anger knocked. Training told anger to wait outside. I breathed slow and counted longer. I looked at the words that had come at me. I'm getting married tomorrow. The house and car are sold. Buy. I looked at the words written about me. Streamline, sign, delay. I looked at a signature that wanted to be mine and couldn't quite manage the shape. The ache tried a few doors. Facts locked them. An old business card lived in the junk drawer with the rubber bands and the half-pack of screws. Dana Whitcomb, attorney at law. She and Nora had served on a charity board once. Dana had the kind of voice that told rooms to sit up straighter without raising itself. I set the card on top of the stack and wrote a yellow note that said, "Call at 8 a.m. Beneath that, I wrote Hector's phrase because I wanted to see it again. Make it wet and heavy. I set the alarm for dawn. I locked the front door, then turned off the house in reverse order, last light first, so my body would believe the day had ended. In the kitchen, the printer's blue LED pulsed. The fresh copies of my life warmed under their own small weather. I placed the phone face down on the counter and felt the cool of the glass through the towel. Sleep came like a guest who doesn't know if he's welcome. Nodding in a chair, mouth closed, one ear open for the next sound a room makes when a fire moves from outside the house to the walls. Dawn came up thin and metallic, the kind of light Flagstaff throws when sleep has been shallow and the house has kept one eye open. I poured coffee I didn't want and watched steam fail to rise. The sentence from last night looped in my head with the stubborn rhythm of a bad jingle. Getting married tomorrow, car and house are sold. The stack of printouts I'd made before midnight waited on the table like sandbags. I checked the deadbolt, cracked the blinds an inch, and listened to the ordinary calm that didn't match my pulse. A white SUV rolled to the curb and idled. Magnetic placards on the doors read Metro Mobile Notary, Phoenix. Two people stepped out with clipboards and polite smiles that didn't reach their eyes. I kept the chain on the door and opened it the width of my boot. The woman held up a folder through the gap. "Quick signatures to finalize your quit claim," she said, as if offering a receipt. I asked for identification. She showed a badge with an expiration date that had already passed. The man's badge listed an ID number 1 digit short of the format I knew. "Come back with a court order," I said, and closed the door before their faces could settle into anything I'd have to remember. I called 911 and asked to log an attempted fraudulent signing. The dispatcher's voice had the practice calm of people who live between other people's alarms. She took my information, gave me an incident number, and asked if the agents were still on scene. "Driving off," I said, "white SUV, Phoenix plates, company decal." She told me to text photos if I had them to a non-emergency line. I sent the incident number to my phone and to Hector, who was already in a windbreaker by the fence with his phone angled like a tourist. He gave the camera a little extra time on the plate and then waved me off the way a traffic sergeant clears a lane. At the fence, he spoke without taking his eyes off the road. "Don't jaw with contractors in the open," he said. "Document, then route through counsel." He promised to send plate photos and a voice memo describing what he'd seen, stamped by his phone's clock. I nodded. The morning had learned a different temperature. I called the number on Dana Whitcomb's card. She answered on the second ring with a hello that sounded like a gavel. I gave her the short version. She gave me the triage. "First, revoke any power of attorney in writing. Second, place a fraud alert with the county recorder and request a hold on e-recorded deeds. Third, freeze DMV title activity on the truck. Fourth, I will move to lodge a lis pendens on the property. Forward the e-sign emails and your scans. Send me the plate photos and your 911 incident number." I took notes like a rookie with a fresh pencil. She finished with logistics. "Be in my office at 10:30. Bring hard copies. We'll wet sign what matters." Before I could reply, Mason's face filled my screen. He'd started a FaceTime from a hotel room trimmed in desert chic. Beside him, a woman sat shoulder square to the camera, the slope of her collarbone framed by silk. "Serena," he said by way of credential. Her eyes were the temperature of polished chrome. Mason's grin wanted to be a joke and couldn't find the setup. "Dad, you're making this hard." "We're optimizing. Small wedding in Santa Fe later today. Quick cleanup on your assets to cover deposits," Serena spoke without moving anything but her mouth. "Streamlining family resources," she said. "Digital is faster." I asked where they believed the authority came from. Mason lifted a sheaf of paper as if it were proof. "The POA you signed last spring." I kept my voice level. "I signed medical releases." "Not this," Serena ended the call with a tap. The screen returned me to my face and the kitchen light, which had grown unforgiving. Memory stepped forward like a witness, and I made it talk. I opened a blank email and dictated a memo to myself. Clinic name, address. The nurse with the sunflower scrubs, the wall-mounted TV playing a muted ball game, the clipboard my son held like a drum major's baton, the pen I used, the sequence he tapped. Here, initial here. I sent the transcript and felt the relief that comes when the future has something to hold besides outrage. The bank called while I was naming the file. The fraud desk agent spoke quickly like a person reading a train schedule you can't miss. "We're seeing a pending wire for $28,500, she said. Memo, sale of classic truck. Destination, Quinn Family Ventures, Yahoo LLC. She read the owners, Mason Quinn and Serena Vale. "You appear as contingent owner added yesterday via scanned ID and signature card." I denied it line by line. She stopped the wire and opened a case, then patched in a supervisor to walk me through an affidavit of forgery. I froze my credit at the 3 bureaus, added two-factor to anything that would take it, and requested an audit of account access changes for the last 90 days. Dana, on a second line, drafted a cease and desist to the signing service and a notice to escrow insisting any deed from me must be wet-signed in person before a local notary she named by first and last. I set the kitchen table as if I were laying out tools for a roof cut. Incident number at the top, Hector's plate photos and voice memo, the bank call log with names, times, and case numbers, screenshots of the title company email and countdown timer, the suspect POA copy with its Phoenix notary stamp, last night's images of my deed, title, and policies. I printed a compiled packet and signed and dated each page small in the corner, then scanned the whole stack into a cloud folder labeled, by time, down to the minute. Wet and heavy, Hector had said. I wanted the paper to feel like a sandbag when someone tried to kick it aside. Anger paced the doorway, but purpose had the keys. Shame rose in a clean line at the thought I might have missed a detail last spring. The line turned into a ruler I could use to measure what I did now. Sequence before speed. That was a rule both firefighting and the law enjoy. I breathed to the count and let my shoulders drop a notch. Dana called again with a warning. Weekend filings can lag, emergency notices would go out, but the county recorder's queue might not respect panic. New Mexico is a separate exposure, she added. If anyone tries to process payments through a Santa Fe venue tied to the wedding, we'll need a parallel notice there. Bring ID and a pen that isn't sentimental. I set the packet by the door, slid my phone into my pocket, and texted Hector. Heading to Dana's. Send me the plates. The escrow portal pinged one more email onto the pile. Reminder, documents expire in 22 hours. A digital clock began counting down in red. I looked at the numbers fall and understood what I had known since the call ended last night. This wouldn't be fought from a kitchen table much longer. The day had opened, and the line between my house and the world had been drawn. By late morning, the sky had that hard Arizona blue that looks painted on, and the traffic along Milton Road stitched a steady hum through the cab of my truck. I parked outside Dana Whitcomb's office with my canvas bag of documents and a stomach that had forgotten breakfast. The door glass reflected a thinner man than I remembered and a face that had slept in short pieces. I told the reflection we were here to work, not to feel, and went inside. Dana met me with a legal pad already sectioned into boxes. The first box said revocation. She slid a template across the table and I wrote my name, my address, and a sentence canceling any power of attorney in favor of Mason Quinn, general or specific, present or imagined. Her in-house notary stamped the page with a firm thump that sounded like a brake pedal hitting floor. The second box said recorder. Dana's paralegal pulled the county portal on a monitor and filed a fraud alert, then added a standing instruction that no deed be accepted unless I appeared in person before a local notary she named. The third box said DMV. I signed a title. Freeze so cleanly worded even my tired brain could follow it. The fourth box was a temporary lice pendens to cloud my title, pending review of suspected forgery. We stapled the 911 incident number to the packet and appended my sworn affidavit about the clinic day. Dana penciled a note. In-person wet signatures at the recorder before close of business. While the paralegal copied, Dana called the mobile notary company. The line went on speaker, and a manager's voice explained their contractors were independent and had acted in good faith. Dana's tone did not rise. She issued a cease and desist that made it clear their good faith would be measured by my records, not their forms. She followed with an email to Flagstaff Title and Escrow. No e-signatures, local notary known to counsel only. Any attempt to route around would be treated as participation. She hit send with a small nod I decided counted as approval of the morning's pace. My job became parallel defense. I called the credit bureaus and confirmed freezes, then placed fraud alerts through my bank and my insurer. I changed the main email password, printed fresh recovery codes, and logged the exact times next to each action. Listing steps calmed the part of my brain that wants to sprint. Sequence before speed is a discipline you either practice on clear days or forget on hot ones. My phone buzzed with a text from Hector. Plate photos came first, clear enough for a jury to read. He had snagged 2 names off the dash clip in the SUV and attached a short voice memo describing the agents, the weather, the make of the vehicle, the time stamp from his watch, and the direction of travel when they pulled away. He added that a buddy at the Department of Public Safety could check licensing status if counsel wanted it. I forwarded the whole bundle to Dana and typed thanks I did not quite know how to say. Dana spread the photocopied power of attorney between us like a sheet of thin ice. She circled the flourish in my last name that came up short compared to historic signatures in the estate file. She pointed to a Phoenix notary stamp that would have expired 2 months after the clinic date. She tapped a witness line left blank. She dictated to the paralegal the bones of an affidavit of forgery that cited those defects, then added an order to a document examiner to compare my signatures over time with the suspect one. She did not speculate. She assembled. Hector called while we waited for the notary to free a desk. A contact of his remembered Serena's name surfacing in a private security roundup out of Albuquerque after a string of quick marriages tied to asset extractions. No formal charges, just smoke. Dana labeled it lead, not evidence, and opened a new page to pursue quietly. Patterns matter when single events try to look like accidents. I stepped into the hallway and let the air from a vent lift the leaves on a potted plant. I said the present facts to myself the way Nora taught me to call a scene. Revocation signed. Recorder alerted. DMV frozen. List pendants drafted. Notary company warned. Title company bound to wet signatures. Bank wire on hold. Credit frozen. Photos captured. Under those lines sat fatigue, shame, anger, and a narrow seam of resolve that felt like a steel strap under wood. I texted Hector a plain thank you and put the phone away before I could say more than I meant. On the way home, I stopped at Evelyn Brooks' gallery to deliver the finished chair. I carried it in carefully and set it beneath a watercolor of aspens. She noticed the trimmer in my hand and poured mint tea without comment. I told her the facts, not the drama, and she offered a suggestion that fit me better than anger. A short factual letter to the neighbors and the church deacons with the incident number and counsel's contact would create witnesses without starting a rumor mill. Control the record, she said. Do not let the record control you. Her voice softened at the end in a way that said she had watched other people ride out their own storms. Back in the truck, I drafted a one-page summary using language a man could read without raising his blood pressure. Timeline of the call, the notary visit, the police incident number, the bank hold, the attorney retained, the instruction to route inquiries to counsel. No adjectives worth fighting over. At home, I printed 5 copies and walked 2 to the neighbors who had known Nora. I did not ring. I slid the envelopes and left the porch steps undisturbed. Dana called with a new vector. If any payments tied to the wedding tried to wash themselves clean through a Santa Fe venue, she wanted me available to help lock the door on that side of the line. Could I travel? I looked at the dashboard clock and the map in my head and said I could. I set the house for absence. Deadbolts, window latches, safe locked, camera app armed, a simple note taped by the sink reminding me the stove was already off. I tucked the document packet, a spare phone charger, and a legal pad into the canvas bag. I left Hector a note under a magnet that said, "Gone on counsel's direction, back tonight if roads are clean." On the porch I stood half a minute longer than I needed. The swing creaked one time as if it wanted to mark the hour. I pocketed the truck keys and felt their weight like an ordinary prayer. A home, a history, a name, written the right way, those were the things at stake. The day had offered a lane. I stepped into it. As I pulled onto Route 66, my phone buzzed twice. Dana's calendar invite said an emergency meet with hotel management in Santa Fe for early morning. Under it, Hector's message landed like a pat on the shoulder. If they move fast, you move clean. I pointed the truck east. Heat shimmered off the asphalt like water. I knew better, and I drove. I reached the Adobe Hotel before sunrise, the sky still the color of cold iron. A porter hosed down flagstones in the courtyard. The wet stone lifted a smell of mineral and pinon smoke from some distant fireplace. Strings of cafe bulbs dimmed as the desert light grew enough to make its own decisions. Valet carts sat loaded with floral boxes. At the concierge desk, a portable card terminal blinked awake, patient as a trap. I put Dana's letter and my document packet in the inside pocket of my jacket and counted my breath to 4, then 8, until my hands remembered steadiness. The general manager led me to a back office lined with framed Fiesta posters and a filing cabinet that had seen more weddings than most couples ever would. The events director joined, legal pads ready. I set the packet down and laid the pages in order. Revocation of power of attorney, attorney letter on letterhead, notice asserting ownership and disputing any transfer, 911 incident number, DMV freeze confirmation, and a request to flag any transaction that tried to run a deed, a title, a VIN ending in my truck's last 4. They called their counsel on speaker. The voice that came through was clipped and alert. Nobody's first rodeo. Hold and document, she said. Block auto settlement on the wedding folio. Manager override for any authorization above your discretion threshold. Collect IDs for any payer. The front desk keyed in a temporary block. I wrote names, titles, exact time, and what each person had agreed to do, then signed their memo acknowledging I had asserted rights and they would freeze questionable payments and escalate to counsel. Copies scanned to Dana and came back with a one-word reply. Received. The lobby brightened with that quick flick the Southwest does when the sun decides it's official. Mason and Serena came through the revolving door in clothes that matched the hotel, linen, soft desert tans, a careful drape. A planner followed, dragging garment bags like a train. Serena saw me and went still, like a deer that hasn't decided which way the wind carries. Mason's face tried on charm, confusion, annoyance, and landed on something that looked like a practiced apology. The planner asked the desk about pending authorizations. The clerk, polite as a teacher on the first day of school, explained there was a hold due to an ownership dispute and that counsel had instructed documentation. I kept my posture neutral and my voice flat. I recited the facts: revocation date, county fraud alert, DMV title freeze, bank wire on hold. Serena called it elder control and said the hotel was interfering with a lawful celebration. I took out the photocopy of the suspect power of attorney and a sample of my signature from an old estate document and set them side by side on the counter. I told Mason to look at the queue. Look at the queue, I said. It's not mine. Serena didn't blink. Digital makes flourishes irrelevant. That was all the talking I allowed the scene. Spectacle feeds on words. I was not going to give it a meal. The manager returned with their counsel still on speaker. Policy locked in. No high-dollar authorizations, ID from any payer, paper copies of attempted charges, signatures on refusals. Counsel asked me to email the incident number and Dana's contact directly. I did it from my phone. Acknowledgments arrived while the screen still showed my outbox. The planner tried to push through a 5-figure pre-authorization for the ballroom and catering. The terminal flashed a red banner that said dispute hold and chirp for a manager override. The chirp was small, but it changed the room. Private leverage lost its secrecy. Adrenaline lifted and I set it down. I could feel where the anger wanted to flare, and I refused it the burn. I repeated one line to anyone who asked and a few who didn't. All transfers of my house or truck are disputed. The sentence was a boundary and an instruction, and repeating it steadied the air in my lungs. A tall man in a dark suit checked in at the desk and asked for the manager. He carried a slim case and the manner of someone who arrives with a purpose that doesn't need to introduce itself. He came to us, presented a card to the manager, then to me, then to Serena, who had begun to drill holes in the tile with her heels. Elliot Crane, licensed private investigator. He said he represented a New Mexico family trust with a duty to monitor patterned, marriage-triggered disbursements. He addressed Serena directly and stated there was a court freeze order on a pending trust payout linked to her prior marriage history. He handed her a sealed notice. Color left her face carefully as if it had planned to. Crane kept the rest minimal. There was an active inquiry into quick marriage, asset extraction schemes. Certain aliases and venues matched a pattern. His order did not touch my property, but because event payments can launder the fiction of legitimacy, he recommended the hotel maintain all holds. The manager nodded in that slow way people do when all the clocks in a building begin to agree. The lobby gathered a low murmur. Onlookers didn't have the facts, but they had the mammal sense that smoke was not far from fire. Mason's jaw moved without sound. He looked at me, at Serena, at the terminal that had stopped offering him the world for a swipe. A version of the boy with the red bicycle passed across his face like a cloud shadow. He leaned toward me and kept his voice low enough to not embarrass himself. "We should talk outside," he said. Serena cut her eyes sharp. "Don't you dare!" Crane's voice stayed gentle. Coercion in financial matters would be part of any report. The planner stared at a point on the far wall and made herself into furniture. The general manager took the planner to a back office to inventory pending charges. The front desk printed an activity log to the minute, paper curling as it landed. I sent Dana a short email. "Santa Fe holds in place, third-party freeze served." She replied with a sentence that carried more steel than advice. "Proceed. Private conversation. No admissions. Offer conditional path." We stepped into a quiet corridor off the lobby, a stretch of plaster and wooden vigas that smelled of lemon oil and last night's cleaner. I placed my phone on a console table, opened the voice memo app, said the date and time and that this was a voluntary conversation, and left it visible. The hotel security officer stood far enough away to be polite and close enough to be a witness. Mason swallowed and met my eyes for the first time since he'd said bye on my kitchen line. He said there was more than the wedding. He named numbers without the why. He looked the way a man looks when the floor he thought was solid proves to be a lid. I kept my voice even. "Then we're going to talk like men who intend to sign things we can live with." Behind us, a printer worked, and somewhere in the lobby an investigator and a hotel counsel tightened the bolts on a different story. My lane had narrowed to this hallway and the man I'd raised. I breathed the way Nora taught me and waited for him to choose which way to face. The corridor off the lobby ran cool and quiet, a strip of plaster and vigas that felt like a pause held between two breaths. I set my phone on the console table and tapped the recorder. The red light winked once, then stayed. A security officer stood where he could see us and not hear us. I said the date and time, said this was voluntary, said counsel was available if either of us wanted it. Mason nodded, loosened his tie as if oxygen lived in that quarter-inch of slack, and looked at the floor until the floor finished speaking. Numbers came first, because numbers don't pretend. He sorted them out loud, line by line, like receipts dumped on a kitchen table. About 90,000 in sports bets and markers with a local fixer who stopped smiling 2 weeks ago. 2 cards capped, a car note behind, an apartment landlord tapping his watch. He admitted the plan as if it had been a plan instead of a slide. Use a power of attorney, Serena said was clean, sell the truck quickly, quick claim the house to leave her a hard money loan, send the proceeds through an LLC with our last name to scrub the fingerprints. The phrase that kept returning was fast. Fast came up like a prayer and a threat. He described the pressure the way people describe weather they didn't expect. Serena had a script and a vocabulary that dressed theft in good clothes. Optimize, digital, streamline. The hotel account here in Santa Fe would serve as a hub, she said, a respectable basket to catch gifts and payments while the transfers walked themselves across state lines. She had a lender who moved at the speed of signatures if collateral looked clean on paper. The mobile notaries were her idea. The call last night had been him, but the timing, the words, even the buy had her fingerprints. I didn't take the bait to relitigate 20 years of father and son. I kept to the single sentence that governed the day and repeated it once. All transfers of my house or truck are disputed and frozen. My tone stayed even because loud isn't strength and soft it isn't weakness. I said I was here to keep crimes from compounding, not to rescue bad bets. Breath in for 4, out for 8, the way Nora trained me when panic tried to drive. I slid a single page from the packet and laid it between us. Dana had drafted it with teeth and light, a conditional agreement that said if he admitted the forgery attempt in writing, cooperated to unwind the transactions, repaid documented damages on a supervised schedule, and entered gambling addiction and financial behavior therapy, then I would refrain from filing criminal charges and support a civil resolution. Violate the conditions and the door shuts. We read it line by line. The paper required an affidavit of forgery signed today. It authorized the bank and escrow to interview him with counsel present. It allowed Dana to speak to creditors and to administer a 36-month repayment plan managed by a neutral third party. It spelled out mandatory group sessions, GA or equivalent, and a no-contact clause with Serena for anything connected to money. I told him compliance would sit with Dana, not with me. Rules needed a referee who wasn't family. The word forgery stuck in his throat. He tried to rename it a misunderstanding, then let the replacement fall. He worried about background checks and credit and whatever future wanted to ask him about the next 3 years. I acknowledged the cost without trimming the bill. Silence did what argument never does. It let paper be a mirror. He lowered his head a fraction. He said the signature wasn't mine. He said he had initialed places he knew I would refuse if present. He picked up the pen and the first stroke of the F in affidavit firmed like a spine finding itself. He signed the therapy commitment and the repayment schedule draft. Then he asked the question sons ask when the floor drops out from under them. Am I still your son? I held the line I had drawn for myself. Yes, I said, and my house and name get managed like a fire scene. Order and rules until the hazard passes. Love without a perimeter is a burn pile. I texted Dana photographs of the signed pages. Her reply came quick and clipped. Meet hotel counsel to notarize, call the bank fraud desk together to confirm the wire cancellation, notify the title company of his sworn denial, email the DMV freeze confirmation with his statement attached. The corridor felt less like a hallway and more like a triage bay. We went to work. The events manager found us a side office where the hotel's notary kept a stamp and a seal. Mason's affidavit took the imprint with a satisfying thud. We dialed the bank's fraud line on speaker. He verified details, answered the agent's questions, and listened as the cued wire died in a series of keystrokes and a case number. The title company received the denial and responded that the portal would reflect a block on any document bearing my name. I forwarded the DMV confirmation with his statement attached. A supervisor replied acknowledging the freeze and adding a note that any title action would require in-person verification by a named official. We returned to the desk and spoke to the manager and fax. Mason informed them he disputed and withdrew any authorization related to assets in my name. The manager documented, hotel counsel thanked us from the speaker, and the wedding folio stayed locked. A clerk made a call that canceled brunch in the quiet tone hotels use when weather closes highways. The planner was paid for time already spent and folded her garment bags with a practiced grace. In the corridor again, Mason asked what would happen with Serena. I told him Elliot Crane's freeze belonged to a different case and any contact should go through counsel. He nodded like a man who has learned the angle of his own shadow. Dana's office texted him a schedule. Therapy intake, credit counseling, and a Monday morning meeting to formalize the repayment administrator. He put the phone away the way people put away a summons. Anger tried one more time to get past my ribs. I felt pity knock right behind it. I let both stand on the porch. Shame, I knew from work, can be a lever if it points toward repair and not collapse. What I would not do was convert my boundary into a rescue and call that love. Care has frame and consequence. We collected the originals, his affidavit of forgery, the conditional agreement, an excerpt from the hotel's incident log. I photographed each, checked the timestamps, and watched the cloud icon finish its work. Elliot passed in the hall and gave a small nod that said his separate freeze had found its target. Hotel counsel emailed a summary of actions taken with names, times, and the instruction to keep all records. We stepped under the courtyard lintel. Heat had begun to climb the walls. Mason said he had calls to make and would come home after. I told him to meet me back in Flagstaff before dark and to take no detours through Serena. He agreed, which is not the same as obedience, but a place to begin. We split into separate shadows and walked out of the echo. The explosion had spent itself. Now the debris would need sorting item by item with rules that didn't bend. I took I-40 west with the sun still behind me, a long pale smear in the rear view, and let the miles unspool at the posted limit. The truck rode steady, caffeine and procedure doing what adrenaline had burned itself out trying to do. I rehearsed the day like a medic inventorying a jump bag, bank case number, title block, DMV freeze, hotel memo, Mason's affidavit, Dana's Monday meeting. The cadence kept my hands easy on the wheel. Flagstaff rose out of the high country in familiar pieces. Peaks blue and distant. Ponderosa rose, the rattle of a freight somewhere I couldn't see. Home before dusk, I parked in the driveway and walked the perimeter like I used to walk a fire line. Deadbolts engaged. Window latches set, mailbox unpried. The camera app showed nothing but a cat at noon and a pair of jays at 2:15. Inside, the house did that thing houses do after strange days. Held itself a little tighter as if it had learned storms existed even when the rooms were dry. I stood in the doorway to the garage a moment and let my eye travel from the bench to the clamps to the truck fender, a check on what remained where I had left it. At the kitchen table, I opened the canvas bag and built the day into a stack. Santa Fe documents first, manager memo, hotel activity log excerpt, notary stamps, crisp and dark. Mason's affidavit of forgery, the conditional agreement we'd both signed without loving. I dated and initialed each page, scanned them into the cloud folder that now held more of my life than any drawer, and wrote a log entry by hand. Times, names, outcomes, the small mistakes I didn't want to repeat. Wet and heavy. That phrase had weight now. The bank fraud desk answered on the second ring and confirmed what we'd been told. The $28,500 didn't leave. The wire was canceled and the formal letter would go in tomorrow's mail. I asked for a full access audit for the last 90 days and added a verbal passphrase to every transaction. The agent read the phrase back to me. I wrote it down on a card I would not carry. Flagstaff Title confirmed the e-sign portal wore a locked icon next to my name. Any deed would require wet ink before a notary Dana named. The county recorder's clerk sounded like a man working a window in a windstorm. He logged Dana's notice and my incident number and warned that weekend queues sometimes lagged. He promised to flag anything that smelled like my parcel. His promise felt like a sandbag placed in the right spot. Mason called from the road, voice smaller and steadier. "Therapy intake tomorrow," he said. "Dana's at 9 Monday. No contact with Serena." I kept my end neutral and procedural. "Received," I said. "Drive safe." We did not say more. It was not the hour for gratitude or for judgment. It was the hour for keeping the floor under us. I walked 2 envelopes down the block, plain letters with the facts. The incident number, counsel's contact, the instruction to route any inquiries through Dana. No commentary, no adjectives, just witness building. Back home, I typed the same note to the church deacons and hit send. Hector replied to my text with a thumbs up and 5 words that sounded better than comfort. "Paper saved the day, partner." Small acts rehumanize a house. I reheated a bowl of chili and ate it standing by the sink, spoon ringing the ceramic only once. I oiled a chisel and put it back in its slot. I wiped dust from the truck's fender and saw my face come back clearer than it had in the hotel lobby. On the porch swing, I set the chain moving a little to hear that single, mended creak. I named aloud what remained mine: the deed, the tools, the truck, the right signature in the right place. Saying it didn't change anything on paper. It changed the room. The mail came late, as it does when wind pushes routes out of shape. Among the catalogs and a dental reminder sat an envelope that didn't belong. Loan servicer branding I didn't recognize, bold print shouting important, payment due. Inside, a notice for a second mortgage opened 6 weeks ago with my e-signature, expedited appraisal, and a payment already late. My name printed hard in black above an address that was right, a loan number I'd never seen, and a phone I didn't own. I read it twice. Then I called Dana. She recognized the pattern before I finished the first paragraph. "Bridge lien fraud," she said. Tonight, call the servicer and open a fraud dispute. Demand copies of the application, appraisal, disclosures, and the IP and device logs for the e-signature. I'll draft a rescission letter asserting identity theft and material misrepresentation. We'll add an affidavit of identity theft and extend your police report. Do not call anyone else. The night shift rep at the servicer had the exhausted kindness of people paid to sit inside other people's trouble. She pulled the account and read what she could see. Appraisal, desktop valuation by a third-party vendor. Employment, email at an LLC that wore my last name. Contact phone, not mine. Sir, I'm freezing the account and opening a fraud case. Your ID is, she gave me a number, and you'll receive a packet tomorrow. I gave her my incident number and Dana's contact. She noted both and promised the file would be tagged to escalate. Back at the table, I added the servicer's case ID to my log, stapled the notice to the top, and cross-referenced dates against what I now understood of Serena's timeline. 6 weeks ago fit. The scam preferred speed and shadow. Dana's draft letter landed by email a few minutes later, tight language demanding complete rescission for identity theft and misrepresentation, CC'd to the servicer's fraud unit and state regulators. I printed, signed, scanned, and sent. The printer's light pulsed, another heartbeat inside the house. Anger pressed to the front like a hand on glass. I let it touch and not lead. Tomorrow's script needed to be unambiguous. No Serena contact, no lectures to Mason, yes to therapy intake and repayment structure, yes to expanding shields, recheck freezes, add the mailbox lock, keep the bank passphrase where it belongs. I read the plan aloud once and heard Nora in the plainness of it. Breathe, sequence before speed. Before bed, I armed the camera system and spun the safe dial until the click felt like a shoulder settling. I placed the second mortgage packet on top of Monday's stack and left the pen beside it like a bright tool. Dana's text arrived. Servicer acknowledged freeze. We'll kill this paper trail. I turned off the last light and let the house find its size again. The explosion was over. Cleanup had started. The night felt longer than it needed to be and exactly as long as it should. I woke before the alarm, sky still a gray band above the pines, and ran cold water over my face until the mirror stopped arguing. On the kitchen table, I set a clean sheet of paper and wrote a headline in block letters. Stabilize, then build. 3 columns followed. Legal, financial shields, human. The order made sense in the bones. Stop the bleed, then reinforce. Then remember you're more than a patient on a gurney. In the garage, I let action speak first. I swept pine dust into a pile, sharpened 2 chisels until they shaved curls off scrap, coiled cords that had knotted, labeled drawers I'd put off for months. Each gesture returned a little square of ground. I photographed serial numbers of the heavier tools and uploaded them beside the insurance record, not trusting memory or the cloud alone. I listed redundant gear to sell and drafted a bill of sale template on my laptop. Date, serial, signatures, so that nothing left the property without a trail of ink. The insurer's line opened at 8. I asked for enhanced endorsements, identity fraud expense coverage, equipment rider, higher theft limits. The rep walked me through forms, promised a call from an inspector about locks and lighting, and booked a roof check before the monsoons. I drove a new screw into the mailbox latch, small metal against big threat, and scheduled quarterly audits of what I called my house file. If you give a thing a name, it remembers it has weight. I reconfirmed credit freezes, reset bank passphrases, rotated passwords, printed recovery codes for the safe. On a fresh sheet, I built an ice sheet in case of emergency with Dana's number, the bank fraud desk, recorder clerk, and every case number stacked neat. 1 copy went in the safe. Another I sealed in an envelope with Hector's name on it. Neighbor fail-safes matter when phones break. By late morning, I texted Evelyn and Hector. Supper tonight. Chili, cornbread, coffee. Not a jury, just witnesses. People who could hold me steady if I slid toward rescue instead of boundary. On the counter, I set 3 envelopes. Draft will, letter to Mason, note to myself labeled boundaries. Dana appeared by video for will language. We carved a draft that placed money where meaning lived, the Nora Quinn EMT Scholarship at Coconino Community College, modest sums for the Veterans Hall and the library, a no-contest clause sharper than any chisel, and a conditional support fund for grandchildren that would open only if Mason showed 12 months of therapy and repayment compliance. Guardrails, not gifts. The letter to Mason took longer. 2 pages measured and without heat. I told him about the first fire I crawled, how smoke lies about exits, how panic points you wrong. I wrote that I would not be oxygen to the wrong flame. I offered presents at therapy check-ins, not cash. Money follows compliance, never the other way. I signed it with my full name, steady hand. Afternoon, I called the church coordinator and offered myself as a peer sponsor in the Gambling Impact Group. Families, not gamblers. I committed to 2 meetings, promised to follow the group's no cash, no secrets guideline, and pinned that phrase to the fridge. I practiced a short phone script for when the old habit of rescuing knocked. Short, factual, boundary forward. By evening, the house smelled of chili. Evelyn arrived with cornbread. Hector brought a thermos of strong coffee. We sat at the kitchen table, my workshop plan spread beside the ICE sheet. Evelyn saw the order in the garage and said nothing more than a nod. Hector suggested I add his DPS contact. They both signed as witnesses to receipt of the plan. Not the will yet, just the intent. Their signatures said they would call me out if I slid back. That mattered more than comfort. After supper, I listed 3 surplus tools online with serials and photos, cashless transactions only, receipts to the file. I moved a modest sum to a separate savings account at a credit union. Alerts set for every movement. Rainy day fund, not slush fund. Later, I framed the revoked power of attorney next to my tarnished firefighter badge on the wall. Discipline saves lives, whether in fire or paper. The draft will went into the safe with its index tab marked. Every step logged in the chain of custody notebook. A short call with Mason closed the day. I confirmed Monday logistics, declined talk about money, offered to sit in the therapy lobby and wait outside. I ended the call first, kindly and firmly. Practicing perimeter. Before bed, I reread Dana's email. Second mortgage fraud packet mailed, police report addendum scheduled. Tomorrow's list. Notarize will draft sections, meet the roofer, attend support group, deliver a chair to Evelyn's gallery. Under the porch light, I breathed mountain air and heard the swing chain give its honest creak. The house felt less like a scene and more like a place again. Panic had traded for procedure, and procedure had begun to look like change. Morning in Flagstaff came clean and squared off, the kind of light that makes edges honest. I rolled the truck down a short stretch of Route 66 with a finished farmhouse table strapped in back, the straps humming like bees at 40 miles an hour. Sun lit the chrome in small bright flags. The air held resin and cold. I ran a quiet inventory. Items moved from pending to stable. Items still in the watch pile. Stable, list pendants recorded, title portal blocked, DMV freeze holding, bank wire dead, hotel memo in the packet. Pending, servicer rescission, county queue vigilance, therapy intake for Mason, shifting from promise to habit. At a red light, my phone ticked with a thread from Dana. The parcels had updated overnight. The recorder had auto-rejected an attempted e-deed. A return notice logged my incident number and bounced the packet to the sender. The servicer had marked the second mortgage in fraud hold rescission letter pending council sign-off. Title portal still showed a lock. DMV confirmed the freeze would require in-person verification to lift. I saved each line to the log. Breathing eased not because danger had left, but because the paperwork had learned how to carry its weight. Evelyn's gallery took the morning light like a room designed for truth. I backed the truck to the loading door and we carried the table in, our palms talking to the oak through the blanket. She asked me to sign beneath the apron, small and discreet. I printed, "Do you?" Quinn and the date where only a person who tipped the piece would find it. A couple paused to look, the woman's hand hovering over the grain as if to test warmth. Money changed hands for another artist at the counter. Normal life does most of its work without asking permission. "How's the temperature?" Evelyn asked once we were alone near the back wall. I answered in facts. She listened without offering names for what didn't need one. Procedure has given you a shape to stand inside, she said with her eyes, not her mouth. When the Nora Quinn EMT scholarship papers were final, she offered to host a flyer by the register. I told her I'd bring one that used numbers and not adjectives. We shook on it. Back home, the roofer met me at the curb with a ladder and a coil of chalk line. He walked the ridge and marked 2 places to set fresh shingles before the monsoon shoulder. I checked motion lights, tested the mailbox lock, pulled footage on the cameras just to hear the hard drive spin. I took photographs of the repair marks and stapled the roofer's card to the invoice, then gave both a home in the house file, index tab updated, date underlined. Security on paper and security in wood should learn each other's names. Mason knocked at 5:30. No perfume of panic, no wine on the breath, no company. He was on time and empty-handed. The boundary card I had taped by the door, no money talk for 90 days, therapy first, honesty always. Caught his eye and stayed there an extra beat. I stepped back and let him in without touching his shoulder. Chili simmered in the Dutch oven. Bowls waited without garnish. He moved like a man in a borrowed suit he might be allowed to keep if he didn't wrinkle it. We mounted the talk in small circles. I went to intake. Group meets Tuesdays, he said. I'll wait in the lobby the first 2, I said. I made the first payment to the plan. Log it. Keep your copies. He described the warehouse shift and how his hands slept better when the work ran long. I described the roofer's chalk line and the way sunlight had come through the gallery door like water finding the right channel. We kept to nouns and verbs, left the adjectives to the places that still burned. Anger's afterglow rose once when his face tipped toward apology as performance. I let it pass and looked for the work. Shame had softened in him, less theater and more weight carried forward an inch at a time. I withheld praise and judgment equally. Consistency was the gift I could give, and I wrapped it in plain paper. During dessert, 2 squares of cornbread that had escaped the first round, the phone chimed twice. Dana forwarded the servicer's provisional rescission and the bank's formal wire cancellation notice with signatures printed like anchors. A separate email from the county clerk confirmed the e-deed attempt was auto-rejected and cross-referenced to my incident number. I filed each into the cloud and the binder, hole-punched and corner-initialed, chain of custody intact. The sound the 3-hole punch makes is not music, but it carries a satisfaction that can steady a hand. Hector drifted by after dinner and leaned an elbow on the fence, 2 fingers lifted. He said he'd added a DPS contact to the ICE sheet and asked if I wanted the number printed or just saved. I handed him a fresh sheet with the slot already labeled. He whistled low and said he preferred a man who wrote things down to a man who remembered them until he didn't. We let the silence do the neighbor work of 2 men who have stood at scenes and preferred procedure to speeches. Before he left, I told Mason, without inviting debate, that my draft will now include a no-contest clause and a conditional support instrument for future grandchildren tied strictly to compliance milestones. I did not say amounts, just the geometry, angles that hold if the load sits within design. He nodded without asking for dates or numbers. It was a different kind of nod than the ones I used to get. Less bargaining, more acknowledgement of the frame. After the dishes, I stood by the framed, revoked POA and the tarnished firefighter badge. Together, they meant the same sentence in 2 alphabets. Discipline saves lives. In flame and in paperwork, the rules are the rails the train rides to arrive where it says it's going. I wrote a single line in the chain of custody notebook, keys stay with the owner, and underlined it once. At the door, Mason asked if he could bring coffee after Tuesday group. No words about money, no sideways requests. I gave him a time and a place and ended the moment before it found sentiment. He left more upright than he arrived. The porch swing gave one honest creak like a door rehung after a storm. Night took the house in deliberate steps. I opened the safe and placed the newest letters on top of the stack, then closed the door until the click found its depth. The outcome wasn't a ribbon or a parade. It was a frame around the work and a lane down the middle of a day. Tomorrow would still need rules. I turned off the light and let the house find its size, which was exactly mine and no less. A week later, the mornings began as they used to, with light coming in clean along the floorboards and the kitchen clock sounding like a metronome for ordinary time. The house breathed the way a chest does once the coughing stops. Short in, long out, no flinch. On the fridge whiteboard, I kept 2 columns because columns tell the truth without applause. Kept house, truck, name, order. Changed boundaries, will, habits. The list wasn't a victory parade, it was lumber-stacked straight, so the boards wouldn't warp. Paper taught me its lesson the way fire once did, unromantic, unforgiving, and fair. Record early. Timestamp everything. Wet signatures or no signatures. Route heat through council instead of arguing with it in the open. Freeze titles and credit before anyone else tries to thaw them. Build an ICE sheet so the knight doesn't have to remember where the numbers live. Keep a chain of custody notebook because memory turns soft when pressure climbs. I stopped treating paperwork like red tape and started treating it like a life safety system. Hose laid, exits marked, names written where they count. Love got its perimeter back. Care isn't indulgence, and rescue without rules is another kind of harm. Anger and pity still show up like weather. I let them pass under the eave and didn't hand them the keys. Nora's old instruction kept its place in the front pocket of my day. Breathe, slow down, see the whole room. The room now included signatures, servers, clerks, and a son who had to learn what confession looks like written down. Community did the quiet work of a firebreak. Hector's plate photos and his steady 2-finger salute reminded me a neighbor with facts beats a crowd with opinions. Evelyn gave me a place to set wood and a counter where a scholarship flyer would mean more than a check cleared. The hotel staff did their jobs without turning our scene into a spectacle. Dana converted adrenaline into paragraphs that county systems could read. Witnesses, not audiences. That principle kept the story useful. Shame is a fuel if you burn it right. We did not post the mess, we notarized it. Mason's affidavit sits in the packet, his therapy schedule hangs on his own fridge, and the repayment plan prints monthly with dates that look like usable road. Consequences aren't cruelty, they're rails that let a train find forward without jumping the grade. I refused labels and stuck with behaviors and commitments because names harden in the wrong places when you carve them into people. The will moved from draft to shape. The Nora Quinn EMT scholarship lives now as more than a sentence I tell myself in the dark. Local beneficiaries are inked. The no contest clause has sharper teeth than any speech. A conditional support fund waits for future grandchildren, not as a promise but as a lever that moves only if the milestones align. 12 months on track, therapy logged, repayments posted. Legacy is values codified, not just assets divided. If I sign something, I want to be able to live inside it. Loose ends started tying themselves when met with patience and copies. Dana sent the rescission letter from the servicer. Fraudulent second mortgage voided, account closed, digital trail preserved for any hand that wants to try again. I initialed the corner, added the case ID to the index, and filed it under a tab that felt like a door shutting. Scams like speed and embarrassment, documentation slows them until they show their seams. As for Serena, there is no story to save her. Elliott Crane's trust case runs its road. A civil freeze sits where it belongs. No calls have come. If they do, counsel gets them. You don't chase storms, you harden your roof and check your gutters twice. Early signs are only that, signals, not guarantees. Mason has 2 group meetings attended, the first repayment posted, a phone he handed me without prompting so I could see it clean of gambling apps. I neither celebrated nor catastrophized. I marked trend lines and let emotion stay in its lane. Work is quieter than drama. It also lasts longer. We practiced a new language at the kitchen table. I'll be late Tuesday, group runs long, he said. Good. I'll have coffee Wednesday, I answered. The rest came as small plans, receipts to log, shifts to pick up, appointments you could point to on a calendar. Silence turned from avoidance into shared work. We did not reach for hugs to solve what paper and time needed to hold. The house returned as a character I recognized. Pine dust looked honest in morning light. The truck's engine caught clean, the porch swing offered its single creak, and then kept quiet. On the wall, the revoked POA hangs beside the brass badge, two alphabets spelling the same phrase: discipline saves lives. I kept them visible to remind myself that order beats outrage. If I were speaking to another parent across a diner table, I'd put it this way: know your signature, it's a fingerprint with ink. Never rush a clipboard, not even for a nurse with kind eyes. Keep titles where heat can't lick at them. Freeze what thieves try to thaw. Teach your people that money follows compliance and never the other way around. Lay your paperwork like hose before the flame shows. When you have a choice between spectacle and record, choose the record. Fire respects preparation. Fraud does too. I mailed the first check to seed the scholarship fund and printed a flyer plain enough to read at a glance. Evelyn taped it by the register and told me a woman had already asked how to donate. I left a copy at the Veterans Hall and wrote one simple line in my notebook: frame built, keep it square. At dusk, I sat on the porch, counted the seconds between a freight horn and the echo returning from the peaks, and named what was mine to keep and what was mine to let go. Keep the house, the tools, the name, the rule that protects them. Let go. The fantasy that love can replace discipline, the habit of sprinting toward fires I didn't start, the belief that quiet is the same as weakness. I stood, locked the door, and gave the swing its one honest creak. See the whole room, I told myself. Sign only what you can live inside, and keep the keys with the owner. In the end, every storm leaves behind two things: the wreckage of what was broken and the quiet clarity of what must be rebuilt. Sometimes betrayal, loss, or injustice burns through the illusions we carried, and in its place comes a hard but necessary lesson. Discipline, boundaries, and truth are what keep a life standing when trust collapses. Paper, rules, and patience may not seem heroic, yet they are the frame that keeps chaos from stealing more than it already has. Love, too, must carry a perimeter. Without structure, it dissolves into indulgence, but with it, it becomes a steady flame that lights the way forward. What matters is not how many times the world tests us, but how faithfully we choose to stand, document, and defend what is ours to protect. Thank you for walking through this journey with us. We'd love to hear your reflections. Share your thoughts in the comments, subscribe, and stay connected so you never miss the stories ahead.